Hi YouTubers, right. There's been a lot of feedback on the review of the Mastech 8218. I thank you very much. A lot of you picked up things that I certainly didn't pick up, and I certainly would agree with the general sentiment in terms of trying to use it to do high voltage measurements and what have you. But I thought we'll get stuck down into this little torture test that I said we'd do, and then we'll have a little discussion about the quality and pricing of big brands like Fluke and Agilent, let's say, versus the cheaper meters. Now I'm going to show you the setup right now. I've got both the meters in my kind of oven cooler at the back here. I'm going to take them down to roughly 5 degrees Celsius or less. It's currently about 15 degrees Celsius is ambient inside that box. So I'm going to take them down to about 5 or below, and then take them up to about 40, 45. So it's going to be quite a heat range for them. I'm intrigued to see what's going to happen. I've got the 5 volt reference they're both measuring at the moment, and I'll show you what they actually got on their displays. And we'll see how they cope with that temperature range. It should be quite an interesting test. I certainly do expect to see some variance because the temperature coefficient of components across that range is bound to be some drift. But it'll just be interesting to see what happens with the Fluke versus the Mastech. I say, I'm not sure what the results are going to yield, but I'm certainly keen to see it for myself. So let's just quickly have a look at the setup. Right, so here we go. So some of you remember, say, when I was doing that testing with the components for my digital multimeter reference check, I used this to check the temperature coefficient of the components that I was using. As you can see at the moment, it's saying 15 degrees, 15, 16 degrees inside. I've got the voltage standard reference out there, and I've got it connected to the connectors on the outside, so it'll obviously be unaffected by what's going on inside the box. And then inside the box, I have both multimeters. So I've noted, you can see they're both sitting with similar readings. Sometimes they flicker up to a 7, or 1 digit on the end, flickering up to 7. You can see the Mastech's doing that now. The Fluke has been doing that as well, so they're sitting obviously right on the edge. So it's quite handy. They're both reading the same. So that means it'll be a nice, quite a nice like-for-like test as I start cooling this. Now what I plan to do, I'm actually going to switch the meters off when I cool it. I'm going to let them get down to temperature. I'm going to let them, they'll sit in there for a while down at temperature to make sure the boards and components also sitting at that temperature, and then I'll switch them back on and we'll see what they're reading. And then we'll take a recording and bring them back up to temperature and see what happens. Right, so the little cooler has reached about 5 degrees Celsius, and it's taken a while to get there, so those multimeters have certainly been sitting at that temperature for a while because it's taken a good long steady time to get there. I've got the reference switched back on, so I'm just going to remove the lid now, switch the meters on, and we'll see what they read. Okay, there you go. I've literally just whipped the lid off and switched them on, and I'm going to note those. So the Fluke has dropped by about 4 counts. If we're talking 3-4 counts, and the Mastech has risen by quite a few more, by about, or is that 5 or 6? So I'll note those and we'll look at the figures once we're finished. Right, so I've now swung the cooler box into its heating mode, and we'll let it climb. It'll probably climb up to anywhere between 35, 40, 45 degrees, and we'll take a reading then and see what the deltas are. Okay, so we've now reached the point where the oven is sitting at 41 degrees. Again, it's taken a fair amount of time to get there. I know the sensor is placed around here, so it will be a fair bit warmer down below. Perhaps I'll get my laser thermometer and we'll have a look at the temperature inside. Okay, it is touching 42. I'm going to go switch that on and we'll have a look at what the readings are. Okay, there you have it. The Fluke is sitting round about where it started, and we're quite a few counts out on the Mastech. So I'm going to note those and then we'll have a little conversation about that. Just out of interest, just the laser gun, if we point it around, so it's sitting at the temperature of the actual meters themselves is sitting around 52, 53 degrees. Looking at the Fluke, yep, the Mastech seems to heat up a fair bit more compared to the Fluke. Right, so just as a final, what I did do was I put the cooler on again and gently brought it back to ambient temperature again. And the Fluke is literally back where we started, and the Mastech is obviously still coming back. If you recall the reference out there, obviously there might be some drop on the wires, so I take it the Fluke is correct because that's where we started. They were both on the same reading, and the Mastech obviously still has a little bit of temperature equalization to do till it comes back to where it should be. So let's have a quick chat about that. Right then, so how do we sum this up between the two? Just to go back to the figures, we started off at 15 degrees. The Fluke was measuring 5.0006/7. The Mastech was measuring the same. At 5 degrees, the Fluke was measuring 5.0003. The Mastech was measuring 5.0013. So the delta there, the Fluke was only 3 counts out. The Mastech was 7 counts out. That's within its spec. When we heated it up though, when we took it up to that 41 degrees where they were sitting around 53 degrees, the Fluke was reading 5.0007, which is spot on what it started at. So it's certainly its temperature coefficient and the components inside must be fairly good. The Mastech was sitting at 4.9927. It was 80 counts out. Now I did a quick calculation at the 0.003% out plus 6 count for that range, which meant it could have been 25 counts out and been within spec, but 80 counts, it's obviously a fair way out of spec. But it's out of its specified temperature range. They do specify a temperature range of 18 degrees to 28 degrees. But this wasn't about obviously checking within the specified ranges. It was a bit of a torture test to see which one held up. So I know there are folk out there who have strong feelings about overpriced Fluke, and there are people now who are, after seeing the review on this Mastech meter, say this is a way overpriced cheapie. I am a Fluke fan, and I think certainly you can see from the kind of how well it did under those tests, and generally speaking the build quality of Fluke, you do get what you pay for, but they can be expensive. I am always on the hunt for a well-priced meter which performs well and has good build quality to compete with the Fluke. That's how I came across the Bryman. So that quest will always continue, and someone else has just recently brought to my attention some other meters which should perhaps compete with the Fluke 87 Series 5, and if I can get my hands on those I will. Now the Unity UT61E is going to be an interesting device because it's well priced, it's got quoted good resolution, good accuracy, plus it does PC data logging, and I'm going to put it through the same test. Again, I wouldn't expect it to perform really well, but if it performs reasonably well and can do what it's quoted to do for that price, then that might be a winner. We'll obviously open it up inside to see how well it's built inside and whether it can handle high voltages. But anyway, an interesting one. I say it's always interesting to unearth the ins and outs of some of these meters, and I suppose I leave it up to your discretion how you want to call it. As I say, I totally respect if some people still say that Flukes are overpriced, but there's that for a reason. So let's discuss why there is that pricing on the Flukes, and I'll give you a little bit of background on what I've been told. What happens apparently certainly on the cheaper multimeters and the other brands, when they go through a quality control, obviously you can see that they're potentially using far cheaper components. Also the QA process, they will, on a Fluke production line, apparently they'll, let's say, check 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 meters to make sure they're within spec and the quality and the build is okay. whereas on the cheaper lines they'll only test 1 in 50, 1 in 100, maybe 1 in 500. And so you can potentially get quite a few which are all about in terms of their specification. And sometimes you can be lucky if you get one which seems like this, which seems to be fairly spot on in terms of its accuracy according to its spec and the resolution. So there you go. I'll leave it up to your discretion in terms of how you want to call it. It'll be interesting to see what you have to say about this little torch test. But anyway, I thank you very much again for your support, and I'll catch you very soon for the next video. Cheers.